A high-ranking officer slapped a black woman without hesitation, believing she had wandered into the courthouse by mistake. But when he discovered her true identity, he was left speechless, frozen in shock. "Don't she know where she is?" Lennon Phillips muttered under his breath, jaw clenched, knuckles white on the brim of his Stetson. His boots clicked sharp on the marble floor of the Colorado Federal Courthouse, each step a slow drumbeat of control he believed was rightfully his. Folks in the hallway stiffened when they saw him coming. That man didn't walk like law enforcement. He marched like he owned the damn place. Lennon was 6'4", chest full of ribbons and medals gleaming like brass lies. 30 years in uniform had carved a statue out of him. Hard-set jaw, grizzled gray hair, ice-chip eyes that froze before they looked. He didn't smile. He didn't blink much either. To the brass, he was a warhorse. To the streets of Aurora, he was a ghost that only came when trouble smelled like melanin. He wasn't even assigned to that courtroom that Thursday morning, just called in to observe a trafficking case he'd busted last fall. But when he entered, he spotted her right away, a black woman standing calm beside the defense table, speaking in hushed tones to a young lawyer. Natural curls, earth-tone suit, no badge, no robe. In Phillips's mind, she didn't belong. And then it happened. He didn't ask questions. He didn't say her name. He just stormed forward like he was back in Kandahar, barking, "You don't speak to attorneys in my courtroom, miss. This ain't no place for your games." The woman looked up calmly, just blinking. He didn't wait for her response. The back of his hand cracked across her cheek with the kind of violence that echoed, not just off the walls, but through the bones of everyone who witnessed it. Her glasses flew from her face. A young intern gasped. A bailiff flinched. A pen dropped and rolled noisily across the floor like a death bell in a chapel. She didn't move, didn't shout, didn't cry. She simply bent down, picked up her glasses, wiped them against her blazer, and put them back on. Then she looked him dead in the eye. "My name is Judge Esther Torres," she said. Her voice was iron velvet, cold steel wrapped in silk. "I am presiding today." Phillips's mouth opened, closed, opened again. But the words, they didn't come. His face drained of all color, and for the first time in years, the courtroom watched as the man who made others tremble began to tremble himself. It took just 4 words to collapse 30 years of untouchable power. A courtroom full of people stood still like statues. Lawyers, bailiffs, clerks, the damn stenographer, all unsure if they were witnessing a moment of madness or the beginning of something much larger. Judge Torres didn't call for security. She didn't scream or demand an arrest. No, her grace was louder than any siren. She just turned to the stunned room and said, "This court will recess for 15 minutes." And then walked away with poise so sharp she cut the silence in half. In the back of the room, a young assistant DA named Sydney Sweeney had her phone in hand the entire time, hands shaking, face pale. But she had instinct, and a sense of justice her law school professors would have been proud of. She caught the slap, caught the silence, caught every second of the look in Judge Torres's eyes. She didn't wait. The video hit local inboxes within 7 minutes. Journalists, activists, the mayor's assistant, Denver Post, a tweet, a Facebook repost, a TikTok with the caption, "White cop slaps black federal judge," and then silence. By the time Judge Torres closed the door to her chambers, the courthouse was already buzzing like a hornet's nest kicked at high noon. Phones rang. Security scurried. Even the Chief Justice upstairs pulled down his blinds. By the time Judge Torres turned the latch on her chamber door, the world outside was already spinning like a rusty fan on full blast. She didn't sit, not right away. She stood there a moment, her hand still on the doorknob, breathing slow, measured, like a woman trying to hold something in that didn't belong spilling out in front of anyone else. Her face was calm, her spine straight, but her right cheek had bloomed into a raw, plum-colored welt. She reached for her reading glasses, not to read, but to have something familiar in her hand. Outside that heavy oak door, chaos had bloomed like spring weeds after a storm. Clerks whispering, reporters circling like buzzards, bailiffs sweating. But in that room, it was church quiet. No news alerts, no gasps, no voices telling her what to do. That was the power of her silence. And it was deafening. Esther Torres wasn't new to fire. She'd sat through murder trials with mothers wailing in the hallway. She'd stared down cartel attorneys in backroom deals. She'd buried threats in her garden, literally. But this was different. This wasn't about the law. This was about the line. And how that man, Lennon Phillips, crossed it without even thinking, without blinking. Because in his mind, her black skin and her womanhood made her invisible, unqualified. Beneath his attention, the slap had been loud, but the lesson would be quieter, colder, more precise. No one would see her cry. Hell, she didn't even allow herself to tear up when her daddy was buried in a pine box back in Amarillo. No, what came next wouldn't be grief. It would be reckoning. Esther finally moved, slow, deliberate, and unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a legal pad, a thick one, yellow paper, red margin, and a black ink pen that wrote smooth and confident, and she started writing names. Downstairs, Lennon Phillips still hadn't moved. He stood in the same spot he was in when his hand had made contact with Judge Torres's face. Mouth dry, eyes blinking too fast. His fingers twitched like he wanted to grab something but couldn't figure out what. Every few seconds, he checked his phone, the screen lighting up with another alert. Buzz. "Did you really just hit a judge?" Buzz. "They got it on video, man. This is bad." Buzz. "You're trending, nationwide." And all around him, folks whispered, not loud, but enough. Even his own captain didn't come to fetch him. Instead, Chief Parker sent a damn intern with a post-it note that said, "Lay low, keep your mouth shut. This will be handled." It wouldn't be. Up in the 6th-floor break room of the Bistritch Police Department, a younger voice read the headline aloud from a cracked phone screen. "Veteran officer assaults black federal judge in open court." The room fell dead quiet. You could have heard a paperclip drop, except one person didn't flinch. A woman in uniform sitting by the vending machine, sipping lukewarm coffee. Her name was Sophia Chen. Her face gave nothing away. But under the table, her left hand clenched her wrist, the same one still bearing the faint scar from 2 years back. Phillips did that. Back then, no one cared. They said she was too sensitive, said he was under pressure, said a lot of things that didn't matter. But now, somebody important got slapped. Now the world was watching. Sophia watched the video again, not for the slap. She'd seen worse, but for how the judge didn't flinch, the way she stood tall, the way she stared straight at him like a mirror he couldn't break. Sophia leaned back, her heart thudding just a little louder than usual. There was something in that silence, something real, maybe even hope. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small. She felt ready. Back in chambers, Torres was still writing. Her pen moved with purpose now, line after line, name after name, complaint after complaint. She wasn't building a case, she was opening a vault. Every instance she'd heard whispers, every file that disappeared, Every young black defendant who fit the description. Every female officer who came to her in quiet with bruises hidden under sleeves. The list was long, too damn long. She didn't cry, she didn't rage, but if you listened close, real close, you could almost hear the sound of something shifting in that room, like a bone snapping back into place. It was 6:52 a.m. when Sydney Sweeney knocked on the side door of the courthouse. The morning chill still clung to her coat, her breath puffing little clouds in the thin Denver air. She looked over her shoulder once before entering, holding tight to a black leather messenger bag like it carried something sacred or dangerous. Inside, the courthouse halls were mostly quiet, save for the occasional hum of a cleaning crew or the distant rumble of the elevator. She made her way to Judge Torres's chambers without asking for directions. She didn't need them. She'd been planning this meeting in her head for nearly 2 years. Torres opened the door herself. No robe yet, just a crisp charcoal suit, no makeup, and the same quiet resolve she wore yesterday like armor. The mark on her face had begun to fade, but Sydney noticed the skin still held a faint hue, like bruised fruit just before it turns. "Come in," Torres said simply. Sydney stepped inside and set her bag gently on the desk. Then she pulled out a thick manila folder, well worn around the edges, papers inside, tabbed and marked in bright sticky notes. She didn't say anything at first, just opened it. Torres sat, watched. "These go back 3 years, Sydney said finally, her voice low. "All Phillips." The judge leaned forward, her hands resting flat on the desk. Sydney began to flip the pages slowly, deliberately. Each one was a case, a complaint, a cry for help. Date, name, photo, witness statement, suppressed body cam footage, medical records, patterns, mostly black men, some Latino, a few women, none listened to, none investigated. "I logged each one when I could," Sydney continued. "Most of them were dismissed for insufficient evidence or internal resolution. But the stories kept coming, so I started saving them myself. On a private drive, with backup files. Everything's time-stamped." Torres didn't interrupt. She just nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of what lay in front of her. She had seen injustice before. Hell, she'd lived it. But this was different. This wasn't about one rogue cop. This was a system that fed him. "You know what this means," Torres said finally. Sydney met her eyes. "I do. If we go public with this, it doesn't just end him. It opens every locked door in that department, every cover-up, every file." "Then maybe it's time," Sydney said. "Time someone opened all of them." By noon that day, Torres had made 2 phone calls. The first was to Officer Sophia Chen. Torres didn't need to explain much. Chen's voice cracked when she heard Sydney's name, but she agreed to meet, said she'd bring her notes. Her body still remembered what Phillips did to her wrist, even if the department pretended it never happened. The second call went to Amara Collins, the hard-nosed reporter with a nose for blood and bullshit. Amara had spent the last 5 years writing about housing inequality and school closures, but she'd always had one foot in the dark water around Bestrish PD. When she got the call, her reply was short. "Send me what you got." By the end of the week, Amara had already gotten calls, dozens of them, from men who'd been stopped, searched, and never charged. From women who never reported what Phillips did because the last one who did, she got fired. From an old man in a wheelchair who remembered being dragged down his porch stairs for non-compliance. The stories matched Sydney's files, almost too well. It was more than coincidence. It was method. Torres gathered them one night in her chambers, Sydney, Chen, and Amara. Just the 4 of them. Coffee cups, tired eyes, laptops buzzing. Outside, the city rolled on like nothing was coming. Inside, they gave the operation a name, Blue Shield. It wasn't about a badge. It was about what the badge protected. Not justice, power. Power that covered for brutality. Power that shredded reports. Power that gave men like Phillips the room to grow like mold on drywall. Hidden, slow, poisonous. "This isn't just about one man," Torres said. "We're not here to bring him down." Sidney looked confused. "We're not?" Torres leaned forward. "We're here to tear down what let him rise." That night, the folder got scanned, backed up, triple encrypted. A burner email was created. Tips came in by the hour. An old detective sent in a letter. A former dispatcher turned over transcripts. Patterns were emerging. The morning of the 5th day cracked open not with sunlight, but with headlines. 15 years of brutality uncovered. 47 victims named. One badge behind them all. The photo was front page, black and white. Grainy, but sharp enough to catch Phillips' mid-sneer from a case 5 years back. The background blurred, but a young boy's face, eyes swollen, shirt torn, hovered just over his shoulder. Below it, in bold red print, "Justice delayed is not justice denied. The reckoning begins." It was Amara Collins's byline beneath the headline, but it wasn't just her work. It was theirs. Sidney's files, Sophia's silence turned to fire, Torres's spine. It was every name in that folder. The article ran 6,000 words, a full spread. Victim statements, dates, suppressed evidence. Testimonies from insiders who finally spoke, officers who stayed silent out of fear, prosecutors who were told to stand down. The kind of corruption that didn't just happen. It was nurtured, protected, passed around like a dirty secret no one wanted to wash. By 8:15 a.m., local stations were already running emergency segments. By 9 o'clock, CNN picked it up. At 10:30, Judge Torres received the first call from Washington, but she didn't answer. She had another call to make. Across town, Phillips was standing shirtless in his garage, trying to remember where the hell he'd put his spare phone. His personal line wouldn't stop ringing. Numbers he didn't recognize, voicemails full of threats and reporters. His hands shook. He flipped on the news, thinking he'd see the usual. Another cop shot, another lawsuit settled. Instead, there he was. His own face, looking back at him. And under it, the names. All of them. He stood frozen in front of the screen, mouth slightly open, sweat breaking at the back of his neck, even though it was barely 60 degrees inside. The names, the stories, the goddamn files. They weren't just leaks. They were his history. 15 years of it. And somebody, no, a whole team of somebodies, had just lit the match. By 11:42 a.m., the warrants came down, signed and sealed by a federal judge out of state. Torres had recused herself to avoid the appearance of bias, but make no mistake, she had triggered it. The judge who'd been slapped now moved like a chess master. 6 black SUVs rolled up on the Bistritz Police Department before lunch. They didn't knock. Flash drives were seized. Lockers opened. Phillips's old office gutted. Cabinets emptied. Internal servers cloned. At the same time, another team hit his house. They didn't find him right away. But they found the trophies. A box tucked in the back of his bedroom closet. Inside, wallet-sized IDs, booking photos, a child's bracelet. A Zippo lighter etched with Obey. A manila envelope marked insurance. In the attic, a plastic bin full of old body cam drives, some labeled, some not. They took everything. By the time they found Phillips, he was in the backyard, trying to get into his truck, hands shaking too much to even hold the keys. "Sir, step away from the vehicle." He turned, wild-eyed, like he didn't recognize the voice behind him. "I said step away." "Wait," he stammered. "You don't understand." "We understand," the agent said, stepping forward with cuffs. "You're done." The metal clicked loud and final. Phillips barely resisted. He looked up once, just once, and saw his neighbors watching from across the fence. A mother clutching her son's hand. The boy, maybe 9, maybe 10, staring straight at him. Phillips looked away. Shame, for once, finding a home in his bones. The courtroom held the kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful. It was heavy, thick, like old smoke clinging to the rafters of a church long abandoned by faith. Lennon Phillips sat hunched at the defense table, his frame wrapped in a beige inmate jumpsuit that clung to him like regret. The man once known for filling courtrooms with his badge-backed bravado now looked like a shell. Eyes blank, jaw slack, the medals once shining on his chest, replaced by the glint of handcuffs tucked beneath the table. There was no uniform, no badge, no authority to prop him up. Just a man stripped bare in front of the people he once silenced. Across the gallery, the pews were filled beyond capacity. Survivors, reporters, lawyers, activists, former cops, students, retirees. Some came out of duty, others out of curiosity, and many more because they needed to know that after everything, justice could still be heard in a room like this. There were no whispers, no shifting in seats, just breath held taut in collective anticipation. When the door at the front of the chamber creaked open and Judge Esther Torres entered, no one had to be told to rise. There was no gavel to call order, no bailiff's shout. But every person in that room stood up, not because of courtroom tradition, but out of something older and deeper than law. Respect, maybe reverence. Torres didn't look at Phillips right away. She took her seat with quiet authority, adjusting the sleeves of her robe, her face calm, unreadable. The bruise that had once colored her cheek was long gone, but the memory of it hung in the space between them like a ghost neither had dared exorcise. When her eyes finally found his, he looked down. The prosecution rose. A clean-cut man in his early 40s, sharp suit, no theatrics. He didn't shout or perform. He simply requested, in a steady, clear voice, that the court call their first witness, Dr. Hunter Wilson. The gallery shifted slightly, just enough for the weight of his name to register. A ripple moved through the air. Recognition, disbelief, maybe a bit of awe. People remembered Wilson, the medical examiner who vanished after submitting a report critical of the department nearly a decade earlier. Most had assumed he'd either left the state or been paid off into silence. But now he appeared through the rear doors, moving slowly with the help of a cane, carrying a file thick enough to change the course of the morning. His gait was off, his body thinner than it once was, but the fire in his eyes had not dimmed. As he made his way to the witness stand and swore in, there was a sense of something long overdue finally clicking into place. "I kept everything," he began, his voice gravelly but clear. "Every note, every X-ray, every time they told me to adjust a report." From his folder, he pulled out case after case, dates, names, photos of bruises labeled accidental, broken ribs dismissed as training injuries, and handwritten orders signed by Phillips and others. At one point, he pulled from his coat a small voice recorder and, with a steady hand, pressed play. The courtroom filled with the sound of Phillips's voice, low and threatening. "You bring that up again, Doc, and I swear to God, you won't walk right again." Silence followed. Not one person moved. The judge didn't ask for clarification. She didn't need to. Everyone in that room recognized the voice. Phillips did not deny it. When Dr. Wilson finished, He was helped from the stand, though his words lingered far longer than his presence. Across the room, a new stir caught everyone's attention. Former Chief Gordon Parker had begun to rise from his seat, edging toward the exit like a man looking for the nearest shadow to hide in. But before he made it 2 steps, 2 federal agents in dark suits blocked his path. "Chief Parker," one said calmly, "you need to come with us." The murmurs swelled to shouts, a wave of voices rising in disbelief and catharsis. Cameras snapped, pens scratched paper. A few in the gallery clapped before the judge raised a hand and called for order, her voice sharper than the gavel she never used. Parker was cuffed without a word. He didn't resist, didn't speak. His face, like Phillips's, had fallen into the shape of a man who never believed this day would come. As the agents led him out, Torres turned toward the clerk and nodded. The monitors behind her lit up, displaying a grid of file names, each marked with a date and badge number. 28 videos, all from body cams once reported lost, corrupted, or inconclusive. "These recordings," she said, "were recovered from an internal server hidden within department infrastructure. They were never deleted, only renamed, hidden." The courtroom watched as video after video played across the screen. No narration, no commentary, just raw footage, unprovoked strikes, chokeholds, tampered scenes, men crying out, women screaming, officers watching and saying nothing. Every second another indictment, every image another buried truth. When the last video faded to black, Torres lifted a sheet of paper and began reading aloud the charges, one by one. 47 counts, from assault and abuse of power to witness intimidation and civil rights violations. Her voice never cracked. It didn't need to. The news broke like a flood through the streets of Bestrich, not sudden but heavy, with a force no one could ignore. By the next morning, both Phillips and Parker were officially in federal custody. The booking photos, side by side, hit every major paper in the state. 2 men who had once moved with unchecked authority now stared blankly at the camera, stripped of rank, stripped of protection, stripped of the lie they had worn like armor for years. And the people, the same people whose voices had been muffled for too long, were watching. In Riverside and North Delaney, in Jefferson Park and South Vine, they came out by the dozens at first, then hundreds. Some lit candles. Others carried handmade signs with names, not just of the living, but of the gone. Names like Miguel Reyes, Curtis Allen, Danielle Barnes. Names folks hadn't dared speak out loud in public for years. Now they were written in bold black marker, held up to the sun like proof that silence no longer owned this town. The courthouse steps became a gathering place, not for protest, but for something quieter, relief. Elderly women who hadn't left their porches in years stood side by side with students, barbers, nurses, teachers. They didn't shout, they didn't chant, they just stood, a silent wall of presence. A reminder that the reckoning had not come from violence or vengeance, it had come from persistence. Amara Collins was already on the move. Her investigative series, Blue Shield, Who Did It Really Protect?, exploded across media channels. She wasn't just reporting anymore. She was pulling thread after thread from a tapestry that had been carefully stitched to hide the rot beneath. With access to Torres's internal data, Sydney's archive, and testimonies from retired officers who now felt safe enough to speak, Amara didn't just tell a story. She built a damn map. Each article peeled back another layer. One installment exposed how internal complaints had been altered by department clerks. Another showed how prosecutors had been pressured to drop charges. By the 4th article, she had a timeline. 10 years of deliberate manipulation, falsified reports, and a cycle of targeted abuse that stretched back before even Phillips's rise to sergeant. The effect was immediate. Within a week, a statewide task force was assembled to review over 200 old cases connected to Phillips and his unit. Files were re-examined, witnesses re-interviewed, and one by one, names once buried in the back of courtroom records began to surface. 37 of them so far. 37 men and women who had spent years behind bars, shackled by lies and falsified charges, were released. Some emerged with tears, some with silence. But every time the gates opened and another walked free, a piece of the old system cracked under the weight of truth. And at the center of it all, Judge Torres and Sidney Sweeney stood firm, overseeing each review, refusing to let speed replace accuracy. "No one else gets left behind," Torres told her team. "We owe them that much." The city council convened in emergency session. The mayor, who had once brushed off whispers of misconduct as isolated misunderstandings, now stood behind a podium reading a statement written by someone else's hands. "We recognize the pain caused by these revelations. We are committed to transparency, accountability, and reform." The crowd didn't boo. They didn't cheer either. They just listened, then walked away. They knew words weren't the win. Change was. Back inside the federal facility, Lennon Phillips sat on a metal bench, staring at the white wall in front of him. The noise in the cell block echoed, voices, laughter, doors slamming. But he didn't hear much of it. Sleep came in fragments now. When it came at all, it came with sweat and breathless jolts, dreams filled with flashing lights, and faces he no longer remembered clearly. The bravado had drained from his bones. The smirk was long gone. His cellmate, a man he'd once arrested, barely spoke to him. Most didn't. But a few stared, long, knowing looks, not angry, just patient, as if waiting for something Phillips couldn't name. 6 months had passed since the trial that turned Bistritz upside down, and though scars still lingered in the corners of its streets, something deeper had begun to shift. Not loud, not flashy, but steady, like the sound of water pushing through old pipes, cleaning out what had long been corroded. What had started as an outcry had become a reckoning, and now a rebirth. At the heart of this new season stood Sophia Chen, uniform pressed, badge shining, hair tied back with quiet resolve. Appointed as the youngest and first Asian American to lead the Bistritz Police Department, her promotion had sent ripples through both the rank and file and the wider public. But for Sophia, this wasn't a victory parade. It was unfinished business. There was something almost poetic in her rise. Once bruised and silenced under the thumb of Phillips, she now stood at the helm of a department that had long served power over people. She hadn't asked for the job. But when the mayor came to her, hat literally in hand, and said the city needed someone with backbone and clean hands, she knew what had to be done. Her first order of business wasn't flashy. No press conference, no parade. Just a memo, simple, direct, and already signed by the city council, that announced the formation of a permanent civilian oversight committee. The committee, composed of 10 community members, 3 retired legal professionals, and 1 former public defender, would have full, unrestricted access to all police body camera footage, incident reports, and internal investigations, every use of force, every arrest, every complaint. Sophia stood in front of her new command staff, not in a courtroom, not at a podium, but in the squad room where Phillips once barked orders. "There are no more lost tapes," she said, voice even. "No more missing signatures, no more hiding behind procedure. From here on, transparency isn't a suggestion, it's policy." There was no applause, just heads nodding. A few looked unsure, a few looked afraid. That was fine. Fear was a fair price to pay for integrity. Across town, Sidney Sweeney, now officially deputy chief prosecutor, worked late into the evenings with a team of young attorneys and community advocates. Her job wasn't just to try cases anymore. It was to rebuild the bridge between the justice system and the people it had so long failed. Under her watch, every case connected to Phillips or flagged in the Blue Shield files was under active review. She held open forums in libraries, community centers, and high school gyms, sometimes with just a handful of attendees, sometimes with hundreds. No security detail, no podium, just Sydney, in jeans and a blazer, standing under fluorescent lights and answering questions from the public. What's happening to the officers who looked the other way? Are you going to compensate the folks who lost years in prison? How can we trust y'all again? To each question, she gave an honest answer, never dodging. And though the path forward was messy, the room always ended with more people willing to listen than before. In Riverside, once the neighborhood most brutalized by patrol stops and no-knock raids, murals began to appear. One stretched across the wall of an old liquor store, painted in blue, gold, and red. It showed a woman, tall, brown-skinned, with quiet eyes, holding scales in one hand and a folder in the other. Beneath it, a caption read, "Truth is a door. Justice keeps it open." Though it bore no name, everyone knew who it was meant to honor. Judge Esther Torres had returned to her courtroom, but not to the spotlight. She declined interviews, turned down profiles, politely refused the National Award for Judicial Integrity, not out of false modesty, but from a clear sense of purpose. "This was never mine alone to carry," she told the panel who offered her the honor. "The win wasn't personal, it was collective, and it belongs to the people who never stopped telling the truth, even when no one was listening." Still, the city remembered. To the people of Bestrich, Torres had become something beyond a title. She was a compass, steady, clear, and unshaken. Where once her silence in the courtroom had been mistaken for compliance, it was now understood for what it had truly been, a decision to let dignity do the work of rage. She continued to mentor young judges, sat on review panels, quietly influenced state-level policy shifts. Her chambers remained open to the public on Fridays, where anyone, lawyer, clerk, or citizen, could walk in and speak their piece. No appointments, no guards. "I may not always have the answer," she told one young public defender, "but I'll always listen." As the summer stretched into fall, Bestrich no longer resembled the city it had once been. The pain hadn't vanished. The history wasn't erased. But in its place stood something firmer, trust, built brick by brick, policy by policy, face by face. Not all wounds had healed, some never would, but healing had begun. It started as a headline, then it became a movement. What happened in Bestrich didn't stay in Bestrich. Word moved quicker than policy ever could. Articles, interviews, grainy court footage. It was all out there, and people weren't just watching, they were learning. Across the country, in cities big and small, the name Torres started showing up in places the judge herself had never stepped foot. In Detroit, a group of retired teachers began a petition to audit cases involving the city's highest decorated precinct. They called it the Torres Effect. In Sacramento, a young councilwoman referenced Blue Shield in a speech about expanding civilian oversight. And in Birmingham, Alabama, a group of students created a podcast titled Dignity Doesn't Flinch. Episode 1: The Slap. The national conversation began shifting, not just around police accountability, but around the idea of what justice could look like when it was handled with integrity instead of ego, with truth instead of control. Back in Bestrich, Amara Collins stood on the national stage, not as a voice from the fringe, but as one of the loudest names in journalism. She received the Pulitzer for investigative reporting for her series Blue Shield, and when she stepped up to the mic in a navy suit and sensible shoes, there was no thunder in her tone, no victory lap in her smile, just clarity. "We didn't just report a story," she said. "We helped rewrite a system. One fact, one voice, one truth at a time." It was the kind of speech that didn't make people cheer. It made them think. And maybe that was the point. In Bistritz, not far from where Phillips once ruled the streets with a weapon on his hip and silence in his pocket, a new park had been built in Riverside. Clean walkways, fresh trees, a splash pad where kids now ran barefoot and free. On a quiet bench under the shade of a sycamore, Esther Torres sat next to Dr. Hunter Wilson, the same doctor whose career had been buried under red tape and whispered threats, now walked with less of a limp and more of a purpose. They didn't say much at first, just watched the children playing. The air smelled of grass and something sweet from a nearby vendor cart. Wilson finally broke the silence, his voice soft. "I used to think I'd die before I ever saw change like this," he said. Torres didn't answer right away. She just smiled, that small, knowing kind of smile that carried more weight than words. The scar on her face, the one that had once been a bright public bruise, was long faded now, invisible to anyone who hadn't seen it when it mattered. But it was there, always. "Change is slow," she finally said, "but it comes. It just needs the right push." They sat a while longer, watched the light shift across the pavement. Then the conversation drifted to that day in court. The slap, the silence, the moment that started it all. "You didn't even raise your voice," Wilson said. "If I had," she replied, "he'd have won." My calm scared him more than anything I could have said. He nodded, as if understanding it for the first time. She continued quietly. "He hit me. But he didn't take my dignity. That's what he wanted, to shake it out of me. But dignity, Hunter, dignity doesn't bleed. It endures." They sat like that until the sun dipped behind the trees and the shadows stretched long and soft. 1 year after the trial, a major broadcasting network aired a 2-part documentary titled Torres vs. Phillips. It wasn't sensational, it wasn't dramatized, it was detailed, methodical, just like the real thing. Court transcripts, interviews, body cam footage, testimonies from victims, and the quiet resolve of those who refused to stay silent. The film was picked up as a required resource for first-year law students at multiple universities. Police academies in 5 states added it to their training curriculum under a new ethics module titled Accountability and Authority: The Line Between. Young cadets were taught a new mantra: power does not entitle you to silence. It burdens you with responsibility. Meanwhile, in a federal prison miles away from Bistritz, Lennon Phillips was a shell of the man he once was. Thinner, older, hunched. The arrogance that had once fueled him had long since dissolved, leaving only a kind of raw, aching confusion behind. For the first 6 months, he denied everything, to the guards, to his cellmate, to himself. But eventually, the silence around him became too loud to ignore. A counselor convinced him to join a restorative justice program, not to plead for sympathy, but to face what he had done. He listened to victim statements, read every file tied to his badge. He wrote letters he knew would never be answered. And slowly, painfully, he began to understand that his fall had not begun with the courtroom or the handcuffs. It began the moment he decided someone else's dignity was worth less than his comfort. Back in Bistritz, a national program co-founded by Torres, Chen, and Sweeney launched quietly under the name Restorative Justice Initiative. It didn't make headlines at first. It wasn't built to punish. It was built to repair. Victims were given space to speak. Officers were trained to listen. Files were reopened. Stories were documented. Wounds weren't erased, but they were acknowledged. And that was a beginning. At the entrance of the newly renovated Bestrich Police Department, a brass plaque was mounted. Small, clean, quiet. It read, "Where once the wrong were shielded, now the right are protected." It began with a slap. It ended with a collective awakening. The story of Bestrich wasn't just about the fall of a bad man. It was the slow, stubborn rise of something better. Of courage in silence. Of change that comes not with fire, but with firm hands and clear eyes. And of the unshakable truth that while justice may come late, when it comes, it does not knock. It opens the door. The story of Torres versus Phillips is not just a legal drama. It is a powerful reflection on dignity, justice, and the quiet strength of those who choose principle over power. What makes the narrative unforgettable is the emotional journey of Judge Esther Torres. From the moment she stood silent after being assaulted to leading a movement that redefined an entire city's justice system, her path is marked not by anger, but by unwavering resolve. She did not fight with fists or fire, but with truth, grace, and the law. And in doing so, she exposed how real change often begins with restraint and integrity. Equally moving is the transformation of characters like Sophia Chen and Sydney Sweeney, who rose from trauma and obscurity to lead reform. Their journeys highlight the power of persistence and collective courage. The story teaches a profound human lesson that dignity, once claimed, cannot be stolen, not by violence, fear, or power. It reminds us that justice, though delayed, is never lost when people choose to stand together. And above all, it shows that even a single act of calm resistance can ripple outward to heal a broken system. This is a story about hope, hard-earned and deeply human. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way. At the entrance of the newly renovated Bestrich Police Department, a brass plaque was mounted. Small, clean, quiet. It read, "Where once the wrong were shielded, now the right are protected." It began with a slap. It ended with a collective awakening. The story of Bestrich wasn't just about the fall of a bad man. It was the slow, stubborn rise of something better, of courage in silence, of change that comes not with fire but with firm hands and clear eyes, and of the unshakable truth that while justice may come late, when it comes, it does not knock. It opens the door. The story of Torres versus Phillips is not just a legal drama. It is a powerful reflection on dignity, justice, and the quiet strength of those who choose principle over power. What makes the narrative unforgettable is the emotional journey of Judge Esther Torres. From the moment she stood silent after being assaulted to leading a movement that redefined an entire city's justice system, her path is marked not by anger, but by unwavering resolve. She did not fight with fists or fire, but with truth, grace, and the law. And in doing so, she exposed how real change often begins with restraint and integrity. Equally moving is the transformation of characters like Sophia Chen and Sydney Sweeney, who rose from trauma and obscurity to lead reform. Their journeys highlight the power of persistence and collective courage. The story teaches a profound human lesson that dignity, once claimed, cannot be stolen, not by violence, fear, or power. It reminds us that justice, though delayed, is never lost when people choose to stand together. And above all, it shows that even a single act of calm resistance can ripple outward to heal a broken system. This is a story about hope, hard-earned and deeply human. If this story touched your heart, Don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel.